Mass Effect is one of my favorite series of all time, and a big reason for that comes down to all the fascinating lore and history that you can learn about regarding what happened even before you set foot in the universe. The series is famous for expertly narrated codex entries that tell tales of entire kingdoms and races of aliens that have come and gone. But out of all of these little tidbits of storytelling, far and away one of the most memorable for not only me, but the entire community is the Krogan genophage. For those of you that don't know, a genophage is a biologically engineered weapon or agent that is designed to limit or completely destroy an organism's reproductive capacity and ability to breed. It's a much less brutal type of disease, but one that nonetheless can cause just as much pain and suffering, and in the case of Mass Effect, plays a very prominent role in every game. As the story goes, thousands of years before we even play in the series as Commander Shepard, an ancient galactic threat known as the Rachni were uncovered. These bug-like monstrosities, which we actually get to meet in the mainline games as well, at the time were extremely violent and efficient killers. They scoured the galaxy looking for prey, multiplying millions of times over, taking planets by force as they inched their way slowly to a complete takeover of all life in the Milky Way. In a bid to stop the onslaught, the Galactic Council and the Citadel at the time asked for the help from a newer alien species known as the Turians, who were master tacticians and generals that had command of the strongest fleet of ships in the known galaxy. The Turians won many early and decisive victories against the Rachni, but because of their genetic form and ability to multiply so quickly, just as fast as the Turians could stop one band of Rachni, another showed up. It quickly became apparent that in order to stop this threat, more firepower would be needed, and for this, the Turians turned to the Krogan, a warrior cult of purebred killers standing over 7 feet and armored to the gill, that like the Rachni, could multiply and breed at blazing speed. Together, the Turians and their exceptional strategy alongside the Krogan's unrelenting force were able to finally push the Rachni back and save the galaxy. And as a token of appreciation, the Council at the Citadel awarded the Krogan more resources and planets to call their own. In time though, this proved to be a mistake, as the Krogan's never-ending bloodlust and desire for power won over, and the Krogan rebellions kicked off, marking yet another period of a quickly multiplying race hell-bent on taking over the galaxy. Again, the Turians were called upon to save the day, but this time they reached out to the Solarians, a race of extremely intelligent alien scientists who in their labs designed the genophage, a contagion secretly released upon the Krogan on their homeworlds during the war. After coming into contact with the bioengineered weapon, living Krogans themselves didn't see many effects. They remained strong and healthy and had no awareness of what was happening. But the sinister part had just begun. Birth rates for the Krogan across the galaxy began to plummet, with only 1 in 1,000 births actually being successful. And in no time, this forced the Krogan warlords into utter submission, as they could no longer breed themselves into a successful victory. This eventually led to their surrender, but even here, the effects of the genophage did not stop. And by the time we play the games, for over 1,000 years, the Krogan race has slowly been dying off, becoming known simply as a species doomed to one day disappear on account of their inability to have children. It's a horrifying genetic defect that can cause the downfall of an entire empire, and one that led to countless hardships and struggles for all the Krogans that we see throughout the games. In Mass Effect 3 though specifically, we as the player can actually decide to either doom Krogans to death or to cure the genophage in hopes that they become more peaceful this time. And either choice has both its positives and its negative aspects. But regardless, the scariest thing about the genophage is just how unprecedented it is. The idea of an entire weapon capable of not just killing a civilization, but slowly and ruthlessly tearing it apart from within is so terrifying. In the history of mankind, no such genophage on a scale like this has ever existed. But the idea of it even being possible is enough to induce nightmares. We know of grand empires like say the Romans or Mongols who did fall apart eventually, but that was more due to political turmoil, a lack of economic stability, and a breakdown of morals and class structure. Something like this is even more terrifying because it feels like there is no way to fight back. Imagine waking up every day knowing that no matter what you do, your entire race is doomed to a slow extinction at the hands of an invisible force and a genetic defect. Not all diseases or ailments in games are scary because of the outward-facing symptoms they cause. Some induce panic through nothing more than an ability to steal our last bastion of defense: hope. Out of all of the horrifying diseases and ailments afflicting the citizens of Tamriel, the continent all mainline Elder Scrolls games take place on, there is one that stands above the rest. Because while some diseases like the Connaughton flu left devastation in the lands of, say, the Black Marsh and led to conspiracy theories about the lizard race, none have had as widespread and memorable an effect as the Thracian plague. Immediately notable on account of the fact that this plague was actually artificially engineered in labs, it first appeared on the shores of Tamriel in the late stages of the First Era, when bands of seafarers returned home and were met with a host of strange creatures showing up on the shores, carrying a bewildering ailment. It was discovered that, using their twisted magic, the Slode had inseminated these helpless, genetically tortured animals with the Thracian plague. And as soon as they came into contact with the races of Tamriel, the plague began to spread like crazy. In almost an instant, entire towns and communities were decimated, with over half the population of the entire continent succumbing to a cruel fate many describe as worse than death. Symptoms included painful ulcers and boils that erupted across the skin, forming into necrotic lesions that made victims look more undead than alive. The bones inside one's body would become so brittle as to snap under the weight of the skin, and seeping mucus and discharge would radiate from the eyes and ears as the disease ravaged the senses, turning hosts into nothing more than mindless sycophants whose only order was to try and satiate an unquenchable thirst, which resulted in multiple instances of victims drinking water and liquids until their bellies enlarged to the point of shattering the brittle bones within. It was an absolutely horrifying way to go, reminiscent of the Black Plague, but even worse, and this time from an artificial origin, resulting in the entirety of Tamriel being thrust into utter panic. In the Somerset Isles, for example, entire cities like Cograd were so ravaged that the ruler Kinlord Nympharion resorted to flooding all of the town and killing its inhabitants. To the north around High Rock and Iliac Bay, the nobility was so scared they completely abandoned their palaces and took refuge on the Isle of Balfera, while their own peasants fell in the streets. And practically anywhere you went, along the roads and in cities, were nothing but the remains of lost cultures and thousands of bloated and rotting corpses. Compared to, say, the Elder Scrolls we know and love nowadays from the games, this period in time would have been an utter nightmare to live in, and it's hard to even imagine that it happened at one point. Being forced to see the destruction of so many families and loved ones firsthand. Maybe most frightening of all as well was the Thracian plague had no cure. Some accounts tell tales of those like Archmage Ciribane, an Altmer wizard who was able to combat the plague somewhat with magic, but for the most part, any of those afflicted with the disease were assured a horrific death with no hope. And that meant, in order to actually stop this outbreak, the only option for the denizens of Tamriel was to stop it at its source, which resulted in one of the first times in Tamrielic history that practically all inhabitants band together, forging massive armies that sailed across the Abyssian Sea towards the lands of the Slode. In one of the most ferocious military campaigns ever written about in the universe, the races of Tamriel landed on Thras and butchered the Slode like cattle, using every bit of violence and force necessary to practically wipe the entire race from existence, forcing them into hiding for many years to come after the event. By taking out the source of the Thracian plague, Tamriel finally was able to again pull itself out of the drudges towards progress, with the remnants of those still contagious affecting Tamriel all the way up until the end of the Second Era, with most of the final reports and sightings stopping here. And in the aftermath of the tragedy as well, entire new forms of government and cultures were formed, with regions like Cyrodiil seeing massive gains in power over the Eastern kingdoms that led to most of the power structures and struggles of the more modern eras we see in the games. It's here that even new religions were formed this time around, along with new landowning classes shifting in power as the lower population sizes gave a chance for the lower classes to fight for better wages, just like in the real Black Plague during the medieval era of our world. And it really cannot be overstated not just how disturbing the Thracian Plague was, but how much of a profound effect it left on the continent of Tamriel, the place we play in all the mainline Elder Scrolls games so far. It completely wiped out an existing population, tore families apart at the core, and in its wake left those remaining to pick up the pieces and once again figure out how to live, giving birth to the culture and customs that we have come to know and love in the games like Skyrim. And it's a perfect example of how important diseases like this in games are, and why diving into them is so vital for understanding how and why a universe came to be. So often we focus only on wars or political events to see how history in games, and the real world for that matter, is shaped, when often it's the organisms, both man-made and natural, that have the most drastic effects. And in terms of things like this, we have a lot more where that came from.